In the long, dark history of submarine warfare, there was always one rule that was never meant to be broken. You do not fight a destroyer. A submarine is a phantom, a ghost in the water designed to hunt the slow, lumbering cargo ships and tankers that are the lifeblood of an enemy's war machine. But the destroyer is the wolf. It is fast, it is lethal, and it was built for one singular purpose: to hunt the hunter. In the Second World War, for an American submarine to be caught by a Japanese destroyer was, in most cases, a death sentence. Between December 1941 and the spring of 1944, Japanese destroyers had successfully sunk 14 American submarines in combat, while in that same period, the number of Japanese destroyers sunk by an American sub while both were actively engaged in a head-to-head fight was 0. The math was terrifyingly simple. A destroyer could race along at 35 knots, while a submerged submarine running on batteries struggled to reach 9. The destroyer had sonar and was loaded with depth charges, massive canisters of high explosives designed to crush a pressure hull like an eggshell. The doctrine was clear. If a destroyer finds you, you dive deep, you rig for silent running, and you pray. But in 1944, one man decided to rewrite the rules. His name was Commander Samuel David Dealey, and he didn't just fight the wolf, he hunted it. What he and his 79 men did in just 4 days was so unbelievable that it not only shocked the Imperial Japanese Navy to its core, it changed the entire course of the war in the Pacific. To understand what Sam Dealey did, you first have to understand the man himself. He was 37 years old, a 1930 graduate of the Naval Academy, and, on the surface, he was an enigma. He was quiet, unassuming, and wore wire-rimmed spectacles, looking more like a high school history teacher than a killer of men. But beneath that calm Southern gentleman exterior lay a core of pure steel, forged under the command of the legendary William "Mush" Morton, the skipper of the USS Wahoo. Dealey had been Morton's executive officer, and he learned from the best that aggression, surprise, and absolute audacity were weapons just as powerful as any torpedo. By 1944, Dealey had his own command, the Gato-class submarine USS Harder. On his 5th war patrol, he put those lessons into practice in a way that left the Navy stunned. On April 13, 1944, near the island of Guam, the Harder was hunting a convoy when its escort, the Japanese destroyer Ikazuchi, spotted him. The Ikazuchi turned and charged at flank speed, intent on ramming or depth-charging the submarine into oblivion. Every man in Harder's conning tower expected the order to dive, but instead, Dealey ordered flank speed ahead and called to make ready the bow tubes. He was charging straight at the destroyer. This was a tactic so reckless it was barely even a theory, a maneuver called the down-the-throat shot. You fire your torpedoes directly into the face of the charging enemy, and then at the last possible second, you crash dive and pray you get deep enough to pass under his keel. If your torpedoes miss, the destroyer is in the perfect position to drop its depth charges directly on your position, or worse, his bow will slice your submarine in half. At a range of just 900 yards, point-blank range in naval terms, Dealey fired a spread of torpedoes. 2 of them struck the Ikazuchi amidships, and the destroyer erupted in a massive explosion, broke in 2, and sank in less than 5 minutes. Dealey surfaced, surveyed the wreckage, and sent one of the most famous radio reports of the entire war: expended 4 torpedoes and 1 destroyer. This single act of defiance sent a shockwave through the Pacific submarine force, but it also put a target on Dealey's back. Admiral Soemu Toyoda, the commander-in-chief of the Japanese mobile fleet, was not amused. By the spring of 1944, Japan was in a desperate position. They were losing ships faster than they could build them, and destroyers were the irreplaceable sheepdogs of the fleet, the only vessels fast enough to protect Japan's carriers and battleships from American submarines. Toyota was gathering every ship he had for one last massive gamble called Operation Ago, a plan to lure the American invasion fleet into the Philippine Sea and annihilate it in one decisive battle. To do this, he concentrated the entire Japanese mobile fleet at a remote forward anchorage called Tawi in the Sulu archipelago. It was the largest concentration of Japanese naval power since the Battle of Midway, featuring 4 battleships, including the super battleship Yamato, 9 aircraft carriers, 15 cruisers, and 28 precious destroyers. They were coiled spring, waiting for the American invasion of the Marianas to begin. American codebreakers at Station Hypo in Hawaii knew they were there, and Admiral Charles Lockwood, the commander of the Pacific Submarine Force, knew exactly who to send. He sent the one man who wasn't afraid of destroyers, Samuel Dealey and the USS Harder. His orders were simple: get into the Hornet's Nest, patrol the waters around Tawi, and attack any targets of opportunity. For days, Harder operated completely undetected, slipping between Japanese patrols and charting the fleet movements. He was a phantom just miles from the heavily guarded anchorage on Earth. But then his luck ran out. At 0300 on June 6th, the same day Allied troops were storming the beaches in Normandy, a Japanese patrol spotted the faint feather of Harder's periscope wake in the moonlight. The alarm was sounded, and the hunt was on. Within an hour, 3 destroyers, the Minazuki, Hayanami, and Tanikaze, were detached from the fleet with one simple order: find and kill the American submarine. At 0647, as the first light of dawn streaked the sky, Commander Dealey stood in the conning tower, his eye pressed to the periscope. He watched as the 3 destroyers cut through the water, coming right for him in a classic search and destroy pattern designed to box the submarine into a kill zone. Every man in the Harder knew the book said to run, to dive to 400 feet and pray. But Dealey had no intention of running. He swung Harder's bow and pointed it directly at the charging Minazuki. The range closed to 1,500 yards, then 1,200 yards. The sonar pings from the Minazuki were now a frantic, high-pitched clang that every man in the boat could hear through the hull. At 750 yards, less than half a mile, the destroyer was so close Dealey could see the white bow wave she was pushing. He fired 3 Mark 18 electric torpedoes silently toward the target and immediately ordered the boat down to 300 feet. 40 seconds later, 2 massive explosions shook the Harder so violently that light fixtures shattered and cork insulation rained down from the overhead. A third shattering blast followed as the destroyer's boilers let go. Dealey brought the boat back to periscope depth where the destroyer had been, and there was nothing but a column of black smoke, debris, and a spreading oil slick. The destroyer had been broken in half and was gone. The other 2 destroyers, believing they had stumbled into a whole wolf pack of submarines rather than a single audacious attacker, panicked and retreated, dropping depth charges at random.
One hunter was dead, and when Admiral Toyota received the news at 0900, he was incensed. He ordered more destroyers to join the hunt. By noon, the sky over Tawi was thick with patrol planes, and the entire anchorage was on high alert. Samuel Dealey, however, wasn't finished. He spent the rest of June 6th evading patrols, his crew silent in the stifling heat of the submerged boat. Early in the morning of June 7th at 0230, Harder surfaced to recharge her batteries in the pitch-black night. At 0312, the radar operator called out a contact closing fast. It was the Hayanami, one of the 2 destroyers that had fled the previous day. Her captain, Commander Hideo Kuboki, had been searching for the American sub all night and was heading home, never expecting the submarine to be waiting for him on the surface. Dealey ordered flank speed, deliberately closing the range to get inside the destroyer's radar detection ring. At 3,000 yards, Commander Kuboki finally realized his mistake and ordered a hard turn to ram, but it was too late. From 2,300 yards, Dealey fired 4 torpedoes. All 3 struck the Hayanami's starboard side, near the aft magazine. The resulting explosion was catastrophic, tearing the entire stern of the destroyer completely off. The ship rolled over 90 degrees and sank stern first, taking Commander Kuboki and nearly all his men with her. Dealey crash-dived immediately, knowing the patrol planes would be overhead within minutes. He had just sunk 2 Japanese destroyers in less than 24 hours, right on the doorstep of their main fleet anchorage. The Imperial Japanese Navy wasn't just hunting him anymore. This was personal. Admiral Toyota was facing a crisis, a profound humiliation, and a critical loss of his anti-submarine screen. He pulled 8 more destroyers from convoy escort duty, ships that were desperately needed to protect his tankers, and organized them into dedicated hunter-killer groups with the sole mission of destroying the Devil of Tawi Tawi. A sane commander would have taken his 2 victories and left the area at high speed, but Dealey was a hunter. On June 8th, he took Harder south toward the Cebutu Passage, the main shipping lane, knowing the Japanese destroyers would be patrolling it heavily. At 1400 hours, he spotted the Tanikaze, the 3rd destroyer from the original hunting party. Dealey submerged and watched for 90 minutes, studying their movements until he saw they were following a predictable zigzag pattern. He positioned Harder directly in their path, raised his periscope, and waited. When the Tanikaze turned toward him, filling the periscope's view, Dealey fired a spread of torpedoes. The 2nd and 3rd torpedoes hit the destroyer's port side within 5 seconds of each other. The ship didn't just explode, it disintegrated, with debris flying 300 feet into the air. The other 3 destroyers reacted with absolute fury, converging on Harder's position and dropping 23 depth charges in the first 10 minutes. For 2 solid hours they hunted the submarine, the explosions bone-jarring and deafening, but Dealey kept Harder deep and silent, anticipating their moves, until finally the destroyers gave up, likely assuming the submarine had been destroyed. At periscope depth, the sea was empty. 4 destroyers sunk in 4 days. While Dealey was checking his fuel and realizing he was running low, the report of the 4th sinking reached Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, the commander of the mobile fleet. Ozawa did the math and panicked. If a single American submarine could penetrate his defensive screen this easily and sink his best escorts at will, the entire anchorage was a death trap. He believed the Americans knew exactly where he was and that a massive force was waiting for him. Terrified, he sent an urgent message to Toyota. The mobile fleet must depart Tawi Tawi immediately. On June 10th, the entire Japanese fleet weighed anchor and steamed northeast 6 days ahead of schedule. Their departure was a chaotic mess. They were undisorganized, untrained, and leaving in a hurry. American codebreakers intercepted their movement orders, and Admiral Raymond Spruance of the U.S. Fifth Fleet now knew exactly where Ozawa was and had an extra 6 days to prepare his reception. The result was the Battle of the Philippine Sea, which began on June 19th. Because Ozawa's fleet had been forced to leave early, his battle plan collapsed. His pilots were green, his fleet scattered, and when they met the American carriers, it was a slaughter. American pilots shot down nearly 400 Japanese aircraft in what became known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, and American submarines sunk 2 of Ozawa's largest carriers. The Imperial Japanese Navy lost 75% of its air power in 2 days, a blow from which they would never recover. And it all happened because one submarine commander, Samuel Dealey, was aggressive enough to sink 4 destroyers in 4 days, convincing the Japanese that their fortress was a death trap. Dealey returned to Australia a legend, awarded the Navy Cross by Admiral Lockwood right on the pier. But heroes in war are rarely allowed to rest. On August 5, 1944, Harder departed Fremantle for her 6th war patrol, leading a wolf pack with the USS Harder and the USS Hake. They patrolled the waters off Luzon, in the Philippines, and had incredible success, sinking 4 cargo ships and several coastal defense vessels. But the Japanese were learning. Their intelligence had tracked the wolf pack, and they sent a special anti-submarine unit to deal with them. On the morning of August 24th, the USS Hake spotted Harder on the surface, but her sonar operator also heard the chilling sound of Japanese echo ranging. 2 escort ships, CD-22 and PB-102, were closing fast. Harder crash-dived, but she was too late. The Japanese ship CD-22, commanded by a skilled veteran, made a perfect run. He dropped a full pattern of depth charges that bracketed the submarine perfectly. The explosions ruptured Harder's pressure hull and the ocean rushed in. At 600 feet, well below her maximum operating depth, the hull imploded. Samuel Dealey and his 79 men were gone, killed by the very escorts they had taught the Navy how to destroy. The news was a devastating blow to the submarine force, and the American public wouldn't learn the full story until after the war. But the damage to the Japanese Navy had already been done. The tactics Dealey had pioneered became standard doctrine. By the end of the war, American submarines using the down-the-throat shot had sunk over 200 Japanese warships, including 38 destroyers. Dealey's legacy was written in the wreckage of the Imperial Japanese Navy. In 1946, he was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, and a destroyer escort was named in his honor. The 79 men aboard Harder came from 38 different states, farm boys and factory workers who volunteered for the silent service, knowing the odds, yet served anyway. Today, they lie on eternal patrol, and with the passing of the last survivor in 2022, no one remains to tell their story firsthand. That is why we tell it now. The official reports tell us what they did, but they can't tell us what it felt like to hear those depth charges or trust your life to the man at the periscope. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Every click tells the algorithm that this piece of history is worth remembering. We are dedicated to rescuing these forgotten stories of real heroism from the archives. If you want to join us on this mission, please subscribe and turn on notifications. And finally, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Your engagement helps keep the memory of Commander Samuel Dealey and the crew of the USS Harder alive. They deserve to be remembered.